Good morning. I'm going to start with the history of the clarinet as I understand it. May have things a little out of sequence, but I'll start with this little piece of bamboo. Bamboo is still an important part of the clarinet because the reed is made of certain kind of bamboo from France. Now this instrument was probably constructed by a shepherd or maybe somebody selling to tourists in the Middle East, probably Israel. And this is our first, the birth of the single reed, and that's what makes a clarinet a clarinet. It has a single reed. Oboes have two reeds together, and so do bassoons, and so do bagpipes and many kindred instruments. But the clarinet had a single reed, and that made a significant difference. The reed is built into the mouthpiece. It takes a sharp knife to come up and make a little slot in the wood to free enough wood to make a reed, and you get a sound something like this. And of course, you notice this is a double instrument. It's actually two instruments together. I was in Sicily recently, and we went to a museum a historical museum, and we went to a wonderful collection of amorphas, those big jugs about so big they used for olive oil and wine. And the Greeks they made them, they were yellow and with black paintings and trim, and they loved to decorate things. And I was thoroughly amazed to find a picture of that I'd seen many, many times in various books on music history of a shepherd playing a double clarinet like this one. And that amorpha was 3,500 years old. So we know that they've been playing the instruments like this for 3,500 years, maybe even before that. Well, that kind of instrument was a folk instrument. It continued down, and in Europe they began to make an instrument called a chalumeau, which had a mouthpiece and a reed somewhat similar to reeds that we use today on the clarinet. The chalumeau was a cylindrical pipe about so long, and it played only low notes. Then along comes an instrument maker named Jacob Denner, who was quite talented. He made flutes, oboes, bassoons, and he took the chalumeau and made a clarinet of it. And that entailed putting a tiny hole high up on the instrument and a key to open it, and when you depress that key, it made the instrument play 12 notes higher. Now all the other instruments, cornets, trumpets, all the other wind instruments, oboes, flutes, overblow to the octave. Not the clarinet. That's what makes the clarinet so talented. It overblows to the 12th. So Jacob is credited by most scholars with inventing the clarinet about 1690. And I'm sure some more conclusive evidence will come to light, and I always hope that it will not be proven that somebody else did it. I don't see how that could happen, because personally I have kind of a personal acquaintance with Jacob Denner. I'm very grateful for his work that he did those years ago. Let's see if I can get a sound out of this early clarinet. that low note is an F. And when I play the F octave higher, I play with the middle finger, not first finger as you would suspect, because Jacob used recorder fingerings on the early clarinet. Then from the F we can go on up to open G. This little key here, which the Chalumeau did have, gives A. And the key on the back, played with, in conjunctions with the A, gives us a B flat. Then when we press on the thumb key, we get a C. Hey, what happened to B? That was always a problem. There was a gap. You played from low F to B flat, but there was no B, and so the scale on the top register started on C. Well, instruments like this, believe it or not, were used by in early orchestras, Lully, Gluck, and they're sometimes misnamed. Sometimes you would play a clarinet part on a flute, or vice versa, and so, very often the players doubled. As the clarinet developed, this problem of not having a B had to be solved. So someone invented a long key to play, and they lengthened the instrument so it could play a low E. Previously it had been just F. So you took that low E and pressed on the register key, and lo and behold, we had a B. So the instrument in that way was complete. Here is a 5-key clarinet. I don't have a 3-key clarinet because only a few of those exist, maybe less than 50 in all the museums in the world. But here's the long key, and that's the way that it worked. Early ones, the long key was on the back and could be worked by the thumb. And also varied how you were going to play, which hand was going to be on top, because most of the instruments you played could be played either way. Some of the flutes were made with a swallowtail key, like this key. You would have 2 opportunities, one for the right hand, one for the left hand. But it soon became apparent that you had to decide which hand was going to be top. So the left hand went on top. And so this 5-key instrument was developed. We got a low E and also B, F sharp, and a G sharp, which previously had been missing. Was missing because those early players could play it by playing forked fingerings, but it was not of good quality. This particular instrument was made in the United States by a man named Edward Riley. I have another example of 5-key clarinets. It has interesting history, very similar to the one I just showed you. And this one was made in England by a man named George Astor. He had a little factory and maybe 4 or 5 workmen, and they turned out clarinets, flutes, oboes, and maybe bassoons, I'm not sure. So George had a brother, and the brother was going to the United States, and so he told George about his planned trip, and George says, you can take some of my instruments and set yourself up in business there. Sounded like a good idea. So he had 2 sacks full of instruments, I've read, and he got on his ship and headed for the New World, And the guys on the ship were saying, oh, you won't make any money in the musical instrument business. That's not a good business to be in if you want to get rich. So he, after talking to people on shipboard, he decided that he would sell his instruments when he got to the New World, and he did. And he invested his money in outfitting an expedition to the Rocky Mountains, and he made a fortune with furs. But today, there are a lot of these Astor instruments in the United States, and we wonder, maybe some of them came over on that ship with John Jacob Astor, who created the Astor fortune. Well, the 5-key clarinet was much better than the 2-key clarinet. And this is essentially the instrument that Mozart wrote for in his symphonies and other composers of the day. And Mozart had a very talented player who had a specially built instrument for him. He removed the bell, put a box, which they called a caston, and it went down, up and down, and would give 2 additional notes. You could go down to low D and low C. Later that was made chromatic. And so Mozart wrote his famous clarinet concerto for the 5-key A clarinet. By A, I'm talking about what key the instrument is in, and you'll notice that these instruments are different lengths, and that makes the key. From the 5-key clarinet, gradually other keys were added. This key, aside B flat, was often the 6th key, but this is an 8-key clarinet from around 1820, 1830. Beethoven would have written for this type of instrument. Then here is a 12-key clarinet, but there's something new. The keys are in post, and those instead of having the keys work in blocks of wood, they have a post which is screwed into the instrument, and it was a much better way of doing things. So there we have it with the early keys, and up to about 1900 with the types of instruments that I've talked about.